Hello, Sarah. Hello.
Hi.
Uh, and, and hello to the audience. My name is Yuna Chaudhuri. I teach in the departments of English, Drama, and Environmental Studies at NYU. And I'm the Dean for Humanities and the Vice Dean for Interdisciplinary Initiatives. Um, and I'm here with Sarah Cameron Sunde. And Sarah, I'm so happy to welcome you to NYU. You have many admirers here, many people who've been following your work, many people who've been teaching and studying your work. And you saw evidence of that on September 14th at the last final performance of 36.5, where we had so many NYU faculty and students among the many, many, many people who came to watch the extraordinary finale of this project. Um, I feel very honored to be in conversation with you so soon after the completion. This may be, I don't know, maybe your first public conversation about it since it ended, although I'm sure there's been lots of uh, requests and demands on your time. I know Jay wanted us to introduce ourselves. I've done that. Why don't you introduce yourself and then I'll come back to me.
Sure. So thanks, Yuna, and thank you, Skirball Center, for having us. I think it might be my first public conversation, actually. Yeah, I've had some private conversations, but this might be the first public one. So my name is Sarah Cameron Sunde. I'm an artist working at the intersection of performance art, video art, and public art, with a special focus on looking at scale and duration in relationship to our human place within the environment. Um, and yeah, really honored to be here as always. So grateful for Yuna, your support of the work, and for galvanizing the NYU community around it. It really, I think the work really benefits from intellectual discourse around it, and has been a big part of how it's grown, um, and taken on new meanings for everyone who encounters it. So be in this conversation and continuing this conversation with you that we've been in for many years. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's very robust and a big part of the work for me.
that's great. That's so great. And it's actually one of the things that maybe we'll get to talk about is the relationship between um, uh, kind of context, different contexts, different publics and discourses, uh,
Mm,
particularly in relation to climate art or art,
mm,
um, trying to engage with issues of climate disruption, climate chaos, and whether there's a special role that critical discourse has in that particular artistic endeavor or that space.
mm,
Um, but yeah, we've been in conversation a long time, and we probably should. Of course, most people watching this will know what the project is, but one of the things I often say about it is that it's the central image is so simple. It's so pristine. The image of a human figure standing still in on the shore and allowing their performance partner, the sea, to come to them, come all the way up to where their voice is, and then to proceed. And uh, but it's also very complicated, uh, or very complex um, performance or work of art um, because of everything that it takes to for that for that image to be constructed. And then also what you have in mind for the life of that image after the performance and indeed after the series.
mm.
Um, so could you just talk about some of the kind of layers of this artwork? What surrounds it, and you know, what do you think of as the I mean, major frames for it.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think from a practical perspective of like, okay, what is it, what am I trying to make, and how am I trying to engage an audience? And so yeah, like you said, at the most basic level, it's like it began with this very simple poetic gesture of standing in the water for the full title cycle, but has grown into this very large, complex series because of my choices um, to create it in collaboration with communities around the world, um, and to also create, in addition to the live performance, which takes a lot of work to um, get or inviting that it has become also a very a participatory performance. So there's a socially engaged aspect of that that takes long periods of time to develop relationships at the site. And then there's also a whole nother form that is the video artwork, meaning that we film the entire thing in real time and turn that into a durational video work that's the same length as the performance. Um, and I really think of those two things as autonomous works of art that I'm creating. These two separate works of art, two huge kind of separate works of art on the same day, which inevitably are in conflict with each other at times.
Mhm.
Um, and but it's like the attempt to go towards infinity and get as many things right as possible. And that's been a challenge, and also even like an important aspect of the work for me has also been about learning how to let go, because I do so much work in preparation, especially like this New York one was really intense and really hard for many reasons. It was definitely the hardest place. I produced this work in Maine, Mexico, San Francisco, the Netherlands, Bangladesh, Brazil, Kenya, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and then New York City was the final one. And you would think it would have been easy because it's my home, but in many ways, I would say in most ways, it actually was the hardest, except for the physicality. At the end of the day, when I walked out there in the water, I actually was like, I got this more than any. All of the other ones had major physical challenges. And this one, I was like, I think maybe because I'd overcome so many obstacles to get to the day. On the day, my body was just like, no problem, we can do this. um, so
Yeah.
there, yeah. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I love this idea that you're trying to make both these artworks at the same time on the same day, and that they can often be in conflict with each other.
Mm,
And that it has something to do with moving towards infinity and trying to include as much as possible. I love that idea because there is something very, very capacious, very expansive. It's as if this is a work that is genuinely being made by the ocean, which is so expansive and so generous. An element of our lives, um, and it
mm,
also speaks to there's the title of a wonderful book, Naomi Klein's "This Changes Everything,"
mm,
which
mm,
is, a book about climate change. And it's always been so inspiring to me to use that as as a reminder that climate change isn't about climate, it's about everything. And the
mm,
only way we can really address it is to include everything. That's
mm.
become my mantra, is include everything. The way we live, the way we think, the way we make art, the way, what the food we eat, the places we eat, everything is affected by this. So it does include everything.
Yeah, and we have to let go of control, right? That's like I think that that's part of that thematic for me, is that we can't control everything.
Exactly. Yeah, there's the generosity of the work, but there's also the kind of invitation to
Mm,
forces of all kinds, people, uh, the weather, the
mm,
ocean. Just an invitation to to be there and take what they need and give what they can
Yeah.
and be part of that. So, and of course, letting go of control, which I'm sure is very hard for you
Yeah.
because I've always said Sarah is such an exacting artist. She has very high standards. Um, and so it's a very beautiful thing to see how you create the event and then allow it to have its life.
Yeah, I think that that's, one of the things I've been reflecting on actually is how, early on when I first had that idea, when that day in Maine, it was a Monday when I was like, "Oh, I can see this. I had this vision." And it was very clear, like more than any moment. I think as an artist, we live for those like aha moments where you really you like know what you need to do. And I this one was just so clear to me. It wasn't clear the big picture, but that happened a few days later. But but I remember this. I always tell this story because I had been working mostly as a director up until that point, and so directing other people's bodies in space, and and I had this vision, and I was like, okay, who can I convince to stand in the water for me so I can create this image? And very quickly, like within a few minutes, I like went through my list of performer collaborators, and I was like, nope, they're not going to do it for me. Nope, they're not going to do it for me. So if I want to make this image, I have to actually step into this role myself. And and that was, in a way, it was really scary, but in another way, it was a thing of like actually as a director proving that I could do what I ask other people to do, you know? And and then that, so in a way, I guess I'm talking about this because it kind of connects to the whole Skirball Center and just like the my background in theater with what that relationship between a director and a performer is, and how in that moment in time for me it was critical to actually put myself in that position, and take it on in my body myself. I hadn't performed in many years, and so that was really important. And what I've learned is that it's that letting go of control of actually being the person who's doing it is really important, even though I still don't really think of myself as a performance artist, even though people call me that now. Performing is not the thing that I'm necessarily like trying to do. I'm trying to like create work that is conceptual and thought provoking and moves people and gives people an experience. It's not, for me, it's not the act of performing is not necessarily what I get my juju from, but there's something that's so powerful about constructing this whole thing and then not and then giving it over and letting both the sea, the water be in control, and then the people on the shore who I have been working with for so long saying, you guys got this and you make it work. And I know that it ends up being better because even though maybe things don't happen exactly the way I would have had them, I'm not that like controlling person on the shore, like getting agitated when things aren't quite right. I'm just saying, hey guys, you know what to do, and the community really every time really steps up because of this act. They really do. They always make magic happen on the shore,
Yeah,
and it's beautiful.
yeah, yeah, because it is such a rich invitation that somehow gets constructed. And you're right, you're no longer the director once you're
Mhm.
there, you are now the performer. And I think that move, the fact that you had to make that move in your own kind of identity and biography is also then conveyed to your audience. Uh,
Mhm.
is that they're moved to come in and perform with you,
Mhm.
for some amount of time. There's just some. I mean, it's not. There's no rules about that. You're not requiring any particular way of participating. Uh,
Mhm.
Yet, what people tend to do is simply come and stand
Yeah.
in that way. And there's something very, it makes me think that uh, it's as if you've tapped into something very profound about participatory theater, which is something that has been a dream of avant-garde theater, uh, since the 60s, from before the 60s, this idea about making a theater which will erase the boundaries between the audience and the piece, which will, that Artaud idea that it will be this inclusive ritual. And somehow, just by standing there and letting the ocean call the shots, it becomes an invitation for everyone um, to be part of it in this simple way, to be a performer. It's very, very, very beautiful. Uh, you mentioned so many things that I would love to unpack.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that one of the themes that you're interested in as an artist is scale and duration. And duration is obviously it's one of the things that people will most um, you know connect to this work. Uh,
Mm,
First, I mean, there are actually many temporalities at play over here. There's
mhm,
the temporality of the tidal cycle, essentially
mhm,
here. That's the
mhm,
duration. That's also what makes this a kind of endurance art piece, because it's very hard to stand still in water, moving
mm,
water like that for so long. But then there's the other duration of the project
mhm,
itself. The fact that you gave it a kind of geographical or global shape, but also a time, a temporality, because it
mhm,
occurred over a number of years.
mhm,
Um, so, people are always most curious about the duration of the tidal cycle,
mm,
and what you've learned about that, what you've learned about going through time,
mm,
what standing there for this amount of time says to you, has done to you,
mm.
what goes on for you while, in all the different versions of that duration you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, it's interesting that that is. I agree that there are many temporalities, and in some ways, I'm looking at how do we look at deep time, and how do we consider deep time and long-term thinking and the future of our planet and the ancient past, and then I'm sort of like trying to pull that um into a small scale of like a day long scale. So um and how and 12 plus hours is actually not that long in the scheme of things. But it feels long, and so how do we feel that shift in our bodies if we really take real time to explore it. And
Hmm.
I don't know, it's interesting. I Especially this last time, I really don't there's so much I don't remember about the experience. Like there are definitely moments I remember, but I definitely go into a bit of a different place mentally. I sort of like have an out of body experience. Or it's like a cross between like totally trying to be in my body and feel everything and like have a sensory experience with all my senses, but then also like letting go again of that, and just letting time, like measuring time sensorially on my body in a different way than what we normally do. Yeah, and it is interesting because I do think people usually ask about like, what do you think about? What do you feel? Da da da. And so it is this interesting thing of like, how do we use this little slice of time, this little moment in time to like really think about the bigger picture or feel the bigger picture in our bodies? How do we make the abstraction of the climate crisis feel concrete in our bones, um, so that my hope is that that becomes a different reality and shifts perspective a little bit,
Yeah,
for anyone who experiences it, because I really believe that that experience of standing in the water with me, will stay with people. You know, that there's like, especially because it's like it's about like this, or I'm inviting people to have their own individual experience and this collective experience,
yeah,
that
yeah.
we do together.
Right, absolutely. We'll talk about the collective definitely, but um, I think that from probably for many people, the what will stay with them is the sensory aspect of it, the
Mm,
emotional and sensory aspect, the part about being that connected to um, a natural body of water and paying attention to it.
hmm
You're not swimming, you're not having fun, you're not doing the things we normally do when we're in water, we're not taking a bath, but just paying attention.
mm,
So I think, but I really am so taken with this idea of using your anomalous experience of time, just the fact that you have to stand for that long, which is
hmm
very unusual, and using that as a kind of maybe a metaphor or just a kind of microcosm of
hmm
understanding um, the, sort of the kind of temporality we need to be able to take in now that
hmm
we are dealing with this crisis.
hmm
This crisis requires, as you said, requires us to be thinking, oh, that's Mr. Cat, and he started caterwauling. Uh, but as we say, there's Zoom is incomplete without a cat or a dog. So yeah, the idea that we now need to, as a species, but also just as individuals and as a culture,
hmm
maybe that's the hardest, as a culture,
Yeah.
relate to deep history and the far future.
Yeah.
To stop being so presentist,
Yeah.
which is um, a kind of uh, dogma or a kind of obsession of modernity
hmm
is the present and the near future.
hmm
Not
hmm
leading into
hmm
the future, but what you're talking about is
hmm
geological time. Uh,
Yeah.
the time that now that we have to understand because of the Anthropocene
Yeah.
era. We're now the cause of an era.
hmm
So I really love that, and I think it's a feature of a lot of other climate work. I'm thinking of our friend Katie Pearl Damore's piece, "How to Build a Forest,"
hmm
which is actually not as long. It's 8 hours,
hmm
uh, and the feeling there is that 8 hours feels like a long performance. It's nothing in the history of the planet, and it's certainly nothing in the history of a forest,
hmm
which is what
Yeah.
they're talking about. And you can't
Yeah.
build a forest no matter how much time you have. That's something that happens in outside human activity. So I
Yeah.
think these are all the really important interventions of contemporary climate art. Is just
hmm
getting us to think, you know, essentially think geologically.
hmm
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but you've also, the idea of the group, the participation, the community, that's come up a lot.
hmm
And so that's the other aspect of, the climate challenge. It-
hmm
Connect the local to the global. It's how to be very local, how to be very rooted and grounded in the place you live in and be responsible to it, but to understand that everything
hmm
that's happening
hmm
logically is happening on a global scale. Uh,
hmm
just what you do here does not impact that unless everybody begins to do that.
hmm
So actually, just if we could go back to a story I love, which is the story of how you um, first decided to make this a global, how during the first performance,
Mm.
you had an experience which opened the door to this other thinking, this much the geographical thinking.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was really yeah, it was definitely like an embodied experience. Um where when so as I mentioned, I had this idea on a Monday after many I had been Hurricane Sandy happened, and that sort of changed my perspective, and I understood like on a gut level that New York could disappear in my lifetime, and that led me to try to think about um, or try to create an image in another artwork that was of a little person running around the city trying to make ends meet, and the city's just sinking beneath her feet. And then that kind of I was up in Maine and realized, oh, the tides can be a metaphor for environmental change, and then suddenly sort of like saw this image of a person in a red dress out in the water and slowly rising. And so that happened on Monday, and then Thursday I did it. So it was like 3 days later. I was like, I have to do this. I'm here, whatever. Let's just try. Had no idea if I would actually be able to make it through. And that water was cold, so it
Yeah,
was it was definitely one of the more, and I was so I was very ill prepared, and it was very cold, but I was younger, it was fine. um and
you were 36 and a half.
it was the day I turned 36 and a half, with thus the title of the performance. So measuring time on my body in a very literal way and a symbolic way, to mark that, yeah, that moment as a woman
Mhm.
in her body. And And so, yeah, as I was out there in the water, there was this moment where um, I was tracking the moon all day as it rose, and then there was a moment where, and I was just sort of overwhelmed by the vastness of it, like of what it was to visually take everything in, you know, orally, like all the senses, like how there was no way I could possibly pay attention to everything at the same time. And but there was this moment where I like got very focused on the currents that were around my body, and I was feeling very deeply moved by this idea that the these molecules of water could have been off the coast of Kenya millennia ago, and could be off the coast of Bangladesh in the future. And so, and then I looked back up at the moon, and it had jumped in the air, and I was like, ah, you know, the world is so vast, just like the vastness of it all, and recognizing that those people, the people who I felt connected, or who I, imagined being connected to through these molecules of water, they're looking at the same moon. And what are they dealing with in relationship to the climate crisis right now? If I'm this little artist based in New York City thinking about it, what are people on the other side of the planet thinking about and dealing with? And how can we um, come together as a global humanity to deal with this? We have to come together in that way. And so I sort of made this promise to myself out there in the water that if I made it through those 12 hours and 48 minutes, that this would have to be a series, and I would have to figure out how to make the work in collaboration with communities around the world, so that I could understand what other people and other cultures and folks are dealing with right now. Um, and I gave myself 7 years, and that's turned into 9 because of the pandemic. But that's okay. 9 years,
But
nine
not having control. Yeah.
9 sites exactly. And Yeah, and with that real intention of thinking, okay, here it was 2013 when it began, so where will we be, 7, 9 years later in relationship to these questions? Will we have learned some things? Will we have gotten further in our thinking as a society? And I do think we have, actually. Like, that is something that gives me hope, is that I feel like we are in a much different place than we were. Um, there's still a long way to go, obviously. But I do feel like the consciousness and the zeitgeist is moving towards a better, obviously it's urgent, and how do we deal with that urgent? I guess my way of dealing with urgency is to slow down. um, but yeah.
Yeah, wow, I love that. Well, it's about your ways about slowing down, but it's also um, I think the contribution that a lot of climate art, that a lot of artists are making to this increased attention that you're talking about, the fact that things have changed, people are much more engaged with this subject than they were, 9 years ago.
Hmm.
We've got so many more artists involved in
Hmm.
this field than there were.
Hmm.
Um, but it's also that, you know, there's just so many things to do.
Hmm.
And so people are doing different things and focusing on different things. But to me, it feels like one of the most fundamental things we have to do is, you know, this anthropos this anthropocentrize ourselves,
Hmm.
become non-anthropocentric, defeat
Hmm.
anthropocentrism,
Hmm.
which means connect with the more than human world.
Hmm.
Realize our participation in that world.
Hmm.
The fact that you made this performance with the sea.
Hmm.
Title says it's with the sea. You and the sea have made this together,
Hmm.
and just it absolutely requires you to know a lot, learn a lot, and know a lot. Just
Hmm.
technical, scientific stuff about the tides and the sea. Um, that's a model. To me, that's a model of what we all need to do wherever we are. Try to know as much as we possibly can about the world beyond the social uh,
Hmm.
frame, which of course we're all very engaged with the social frame, and it's incredibly important.
Hmm.
Not the It's not the final frame,
Mm.
right?
And so much of that knowing is also just about like being with in our
Yes.
bodies, and that like I mean, yeah, I love reading and learning from books and articles and knowing as much as I can. But one thing I've learned is that that tidal predictions are only predictions, and that there's so much thought and analysis that goes into it, but there's nothing that substitutes for like actually just being with
Yeah.
this
Uh,
more than human being,
yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, there's still failure on my part, but that's the goal, is to actually and to trust. I think that that's also another thing, is like trusting actually that each of us, every one of us can, um like it's in our bones, it's in our
Mm,
DNA to connect with the more than human
yeah.
world. It's just
Yeah.
that we don't always allow ourselves to, because
Yeah.
of everything else that is constructed around us.
And the thing about the body and embodied knowledge,
Mm.
that's again quite a well-established tradition in performance and in fact in spiritual practice, but
Mhm.
it's often put in the service of a kind of consciousness, spiritual inner life. I think what you and other climate artists are doing is emphasizing the connection of the organism
Mm.
to its umwelt, to its context, its surround. So,
Mhm.
I think that that's one of the differences in this embodiedness from
Mhm.
the embodiedness of meditation or,
Mhm.
or some of those. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's
it's
the dialogue with the sea. It's that partner.
yeah. Yeah, it's true. And that's always want to say like, "Oh, do you meditate? Like did you go into this meditation?" And um I mean, I think there probably are some similarities with meditation, but I'm not a meditator really. I'm not very good at it. And I think what you're saying makes so much sense, because it's yeah, to me it's not about the inner my inner experience. I mean, of course I have some inner experience, but it is about this like immersion,
Yeah.
and decentering myself as a human.
Yeah. Well, again, it's one of those things where this is a false binary, really, the inside and the outside. We
Mm,
absolutely have to have a kind of you know loop with.
dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I was writing about Chisa Hidaka, the Dolphin Dance Project people. I think
Mm-hmm.
you know her.
Yeah, yeah.
And she said that when they're there with the wild dolphins, when they're dancing, and being underwater with them, there is something like a meditative state that she has to get into in order to be able to hold the breath as long as
Hmm.
necessary. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, the physical, the endurance part of your work, I mean, I often think of it as like it's running, like running the marathon. It's a
Mm,
physical feat. Uh,
mm.
but those things, like as we know from people who run the marathon, does require um, you know, um, uh, also an inner adjustment.
Yeah,
Often is you have to get into that zone that they talk about. So it's
yeah.
all it's all very beautifully connected. But what we're bringing, I think, what climate art is bringing is really uh, foregrounding the role of the more than human.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, of course, we're very interested in ourselves and what's going on with us. Why not? But we haven't been interested enough or interested in all the ways that we could be interested. We've been
Yeah,
we've been very scientifically interested, right, in the modern human world. We've learned so much through science.
yeah,
We haven't done all the other ways of being aware of it, which is what I think artists are doing now. Artists and writers and uh,
yeah.
cultural workers.
I also think that it's interesting that like the well, I often think about how it is such a hard thing to do that I wouldn't do it without an audience. Like the create it's real because and so there's something about the form of performance and then I'm inviting people to come witness this that makes me actually follow through and do it, and just how interesting that is,
Mhm,
um,
mhm,
because it is yeah, it's the pressure of performance. It's my obsession with creating this image and this experience for an audience that gives me the strength to actually complete the work, and that I just find that really interesting in terms of thinking about art and form and
mhm,
what um, that dialogue also with the audience and yeah, creation for an audience versus like if I were to just do this as a spiritual practice, that's a very different. I
mhm.
wouldn't do it actually.
Right.
I do
Yeah.
it because I'm making this for people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I know Jay's given us a sign that we're coming to the end of the time. I actually can stay a little longer if you can, Sarah.
Oh yeah, I can stay a little bit longer. No
Yeah,
problem.
managed to get a little more time before my
Okay.
next one. Because we haven't even gotten to, that other dimension of the work, which is the collaboration with your, partners and teams all around the world.
Mm, mm,
And, uh, you know, as we were saying, when you went from having conceived of this as as a one-off single performance by yourself
mm,
to this completely different scale,
mm,
global scale, everything changed. I mean,
mm,
a great deal changed about it.
mm,
So, and I'm sure that each one, I mean, I know that each one of those performances in different parts of the world has had its unique qualities and unfolding.
yeah.
Um, can we talk? Is it possible to talk at all in general about that kind of experience? Are there some elements that you've discovered or that were necessary to make it work in each and every one of those sites? And if that's not interesting, I just want to get you talking about that experience, about going to these places and what that's been like for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, I think like fundamentally. um, what's happened and is that I just allowed myself with this work to really follow it organically and let it live up to its full potential. You know, sometimes I think with projects we do them and we're like, okay, here we go, there we go, we're done. But because I could see this possibility of like, okay, I want to do this in collaboration with communities around the world. How do I really make that happen? You know, on a practical scale. That's a hard thing to do. But also giving myself time to do it allowed allowed it to grow and not force anything, but let it grow really organically. So I've just been really on this path of letting the work um, form itself into the greatest possibility, or you know, scale up in the way that makes sense for the work at all stages. And that, yeah, that means it's meant really different things in different places. But I guess the thing that is always true is that it always started in terms of going someplace. It always began with some form of an invitation um, to to go to a different place that was not my own, or that I was maybe connected to a person,
Mhm.
um, but I needed that invitation. As American, I don't think it's ever okay to just like plop down and say I'm gonna do this thing right here, you know, without that invitation. So it began with relationships and conversations and also like research into okay, who and where will be really affected by sea level rise, since that's what we're talking about, and the
Mhm.
climate crisis, what will happen. But then I quickly learned that it was pretty relational, in terms of like where to go and how to make it happen. And so it always there was always like at least one person or an institution who said, we really want this to happen here. How, you know, let's do it together. So that's a commonality. Um,
And these
and some of it.
were these artists, academics, or sort of uh, s- people who work on ocean policy? Uh,
Um, Mostly, well, it's been a variety. So let's see. Well, I can run through it quickly. So like Mexico was an artist residency that I got invited to, and I was like, oh, that's I can do research here, and this will allow me to grow the work. In San Francisco, that was actually my home. That's my body of water that raised me, and so that was sort of easy to make happen because I had my family there.
ah, Sarah's frozen. Maybe I'm frozen too. Ah, uh, all right. So Sarah's frozen to me.
Um, let's wait just a moment and see if she reboots, and if not, I will.
We'll need to maybe just do a little conclusion.
If yes, if she doesn't hop back on in a few minutes,
Ah, here she comes.
um, I'm just going to pause the recording.
Too.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. So you were talking about uh, so
The people.
Mexico, San Francisco. Now,
Yeah.
now the next one was it Bangladesh?
Well, Netherlands, lots of people, and then in Bangladesh, yeah, it was my friend Piyama who connected me to a few people who connected me to Brito Arts Trust, an arts organization in Dhaka. Um, and then in Brazil, it was actually through you and Diana Taylor from the Hemispheric Institute who introduced me to Belle Borba, who's an artist, who then was like, "Yes, come to Salvador." And then I met, of course, lots of other people with the through that, but that was the galvanizing force. He was the one who said, "Come to Salvador." And then in Kenya, it was folks at the University of Nairobi, Martin Marani, and then Kimagichi Wabende. And then it took off from there. And then in Aotearoa, it was Janine, so another academic, and Teuru Contemporary Gallery, who invited me over there. And yeah, it always grows. So like the invitation is always like the seed, and then it grows into like many other people. Once I know I can go somewhere, then it like it has a life of its own.
Yeah. And I know that each one has had so many then fascinating dimensions to it. But I guess the two I'd love to have, get us to talk about it at least a little bit
Yeah.
is the one in Kenya,
Mhm.
because of the extent of your engagement with the community there,
Mhm.
and then the one in Aotearoa,
Yeah.
where because I got the feeling that that one um, really um, uh, what's the word I'd eat. Uh, I've been saying to people that it sort of radicalized you. Um, I felt that that's where you became much, much more tuned to a certain kind of commitment to indigenous knowledges and embracing indigenous ways of relating to the more than human, and
Mhm.
brought that back with you
Mhm.
and actualized it to as much as you could here in New York for those 2 years.
Mhm.
And then you went back to Aotearoa, where
Mhm.
I guess it was reinforced.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm answering your question for you instead of letting you.
That's great. I love it when you talk for me. um, yeah, no, I mean, I think that thread probably began in Brazil actually because of working with Clara and thinking about the indigenous communities there, and talking a lot about it and understanding the dark history of um, slavery that was present in Salvador, and how that leads to all sorts of racial tension and wiping out of cultures, really tragically. But there's like some deep indigenous wisdom that's present, um, and that was then also carried through in Kenya, and working with this community in Bodo. Um, I had the honor of working with a village that is on the coast. They've and there's tons of oral histories. They've definitely been there for at least 400 years. There's stories of, how that village was formed. But we were so lucky to have um, like a 400-year-old ceremonial drum was part of the performance, and a deep there's a deep engagement with growing mangrove seedlings to protect the coastline. And so we just had a really wonderful, it was a very rich experience, to be working with that community. And they've carried on. They are really continue to be very engaged, and I suspect that, because it was a small village, in some ways it's the easiest. Uh, they're the easiest group to kind of keep in touch because they're all in touch with each other. So I imagine that engagement will continue be well into the future. That the project was a little bit of a catalyst for other things that can happen now in the community in relationship to the water. Um, but learning from them and learning from like how they live with the water on a daily basis was definitely a big, very impactful for me. Um, and they're in tune. They just are in tune with it all in a very different
Mhm.
way. And then, yeah, in Aotearoa, I think because I was incredibly lucky to be connected with and this is, it's always serendipitous how people come into the project, but through a friend of a friend, of one of my high school friends, I met Nettie, and then through Nettie met Amiria and Kingi, who are just these incredible Maori leaders, and they went all in with me, and I think just being in their presence and witnessing the daily practice of reciprocity and asking permissions when stepping into a space, and understanding, I guess that I think it was just hanging out with them and really taking the way their daily practices and being able to feel them on a daily basis, that really allowed me to see, what firsthand what how indigenous wisdom can is the way forward, you know. Like there are practices that are so clearly what we need to be doing in order to decenter ourselves as human,
The
um
one
and it's
you
there.
mentioned the one you mentioned several times is the asking permission.
Yeah, yeah. um that like very simple act of before entering a space and doing something, like asking the ancestors and the, you know, the plants and the trees and the stones if it's okay to be here, and just again like slowing down um and and thinking from trying like I guess it's like engaging from a different perspective
Yeah.
before taking action,
Sure, it's about
you
being
know.
respectful instead of just extractive, instead of
Yeah,
just grabbing things and, assuming that it's all inert and belongs to us.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a complete, it's a 180-degree difference from the way we've been
yeah.
operating. Yeah.
The other one that has, the other sort of like very um thing that has really impacted me is the formal way of introducing oneself in Maori culture is through the pepeha. And the pepeha in the pepeha, you introduce yourself by saying the mountains that raised you and the waters that raised you, and then the waka or the boat that your ancestors arrived in this place on, because they can all track their histories back to that, when they arrived, and then the iwi, the community that you live in, or the tribe that you're descended from, and then the community you live in now, and then your family name, and then your first name. And I just love this because it's such a flip of, um, for, you know, us, most of us here, you know, to think, to not introduce ourselves as our as individuals first, but to like introduce ourselves because of the mountains and the water, you know. That to me, it's such a beautiful example of how we just, if we could change that narrative, um
Yeah. Well,
everything would be
it felt
different.
like that lesson that you learned really shaped your preparation and in fact the performance of the final performance, because it felt like you were so deeply engaged with that site,
Yeah.
and it became, as if that was the site was going to perform. The
Mhm.
cove, your organization kin to the cove,
Mhm.
and your team who've been working there. I felt that that was such a beautiful elaboration of the project. At the right at the end, it
Mhm.
opened to this. It felt like it was Sarah, the cove, its kin, and the sea
Yeah.
performing. Yeah, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
True. It's true.
Sarah, you and I could talk forever.
I know.
In fact, we do,
We do. We
but
will.
we will have another opportunity for more kind of rich conversation with our colleagues on October 6th
Yes.
uh, in here at NYU. Uh, and a number of colleagues are going to be there discussing your work and celebrating the conclusion of it. Um, and before we close, is there anything that you'd wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
I don't think so. I think that yeah, like you said, we could keep talking for ages. There's so, I can never actually touch on everything, but
I know.
this feels like a very good kind of overview of some of the different complexities. So thank you for asking all these questions and
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much for this beautiful work and for this conversation. And good luck with, the afterlife of the project.
well, you're part of it, so don't just send me away. We're in it together, you know.
Glad to be a part of it. Bye bye.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.